What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. I've been dreading this day for a very long time and it's finally here. So if you guys don't remember my KRX, I took it to the track last November and I spun the bearing on the track and I took the engine out. The car has just been sitting here since. In the meantime, I did go pick up a Junkyard K24A2, actually multiple. They've just been sitting there collecting dust, but I finally got everything I needed to do a rebuild on one, and here we have pretty much my Junkyard TSX K24A2 ready for assembly. I do have my buddy Nomis Industries here as well too, and he's pretty much going to help guide me on assembling this 24 because I've never done a K series before and he builds engines for a living. So he's here to kind of give me some pro tips and things to watch out for while we assemble this and share with you guys pretty much the whole step of the way. So because his hand is much smaller than mine, he was the one just cleaning all of the cylinder out, and because he's very meticulous on engine builds, he went ahead and cleaned it for me. Right here we have brake cleaner, and then he moved over to ATF, back to brake cleaner, and then WD-40. You can see how much more cleaner that is, and these cylinders are ready for the pistons to go in. We're keeping this build very you know, regular Joe built type of deal, like garage home built, not a professional, your basic tools and your basic knowledge. Now I already went on Google, I went to go search for every like torque specs and pretty much the whole TSX PDF file, just so I have everything on board for when assembling this engine. But then again, I do have the engine building encyclopedia over there, and he's going to help me again along the entire way. Now before we get started, I'm going to show you guys everything I have laid out here on the table that we're going to be using in this video. Now mind you guys, I'm only worried about the bottom end rotating assembly, so we may not get to the cylinder head, only because some of the parts are still in the mail and I cannot really put the head together until I get those parts coming in the mail. And I'm going to show you guys pretty much the cylinder head anyway. So I literally disassembled the whole entire engine and I spent days on end to clean everything that came out of it, because this thing seemed like the person never changed the oil, so I want everything to be clean. Bottom end is clean, all of the pistons and rods are very clean, right? Girdle is somewhat clean, at least my main concern is the journal itself. We have the crank, which is actually pretty clean coming out of this engine, and I didn't polish it. All I have to do is just give it a good wipe down and we can just reuse this crank as is. Stepping over to this table right here, this table is pretty much all of the new OEM stuff that we're going to be throwing into the short block. So over here on this end, we have pretty much new timing chain, we have the guides with that, we have OEM tensioner here, we have pretty much the chain and the block off and washer plugs for the Type S oil pump that we're going to be using. We've got the girdle with that. We have the Type S guide here as well too, which we're going to be using in part of the TSX guide. And then we have a rear main seal, front main seal is already on there. Brand new water pump. Over here we have brand new Honda rings for the TSX pistons, and I already took each one of these out to throw into the cylinders to see where they're you know, measuring at, and they all seem to be within tolerance. Now the readings on this is a little bit over the minimum tolerance because we're using brand new rings on a used block. Now brand new rings are meant for new blocks to be, you know, in the tolerance it needs to be in, but because we're using brand new in a used block which has miles on it, the cylinder walls get, you know, get chewed down a little bit throughout the mileage, right? So because we're using brand new rings in here, we're gonna definitely be on the looser side, but because we're still in spec, these rings are good to go right out the box. Brand new rod bearings, brand new main bearings, brand new thrust washers. On this end over here, we got the head already resurfaced, brand new valve seals, and everything here has been cleaned with chem dip right there on the floor. Every single bolt is organized and also cleaned themselves. Every single rocker assembly has been cleaned themselves, and the camshaft also got a good cleaning on it as well too. We are retaining the stock head bolts only because we're not boosting this setup. We're not making a grip of power where we need ARPs. The stock ones will work perfectly fine. These are clean, ready to rock and roll. We got engine lube here, we have a ring compressor there, we have oil for certain spots, and we have gray RTV for the girdles and such. I'm gonna try my best to cover each step of the way on this rebuilt K24A2. So with that being said, let's get to it. All right guys, so before we get started with installing everything into the short block, we have to install our squirters. Now this is completely up to you, like a preference thing, if you want to keep your oil squirters or block them off. In this case, I am going to be running my OEM oil squirter blocked off. And the reason why I say that is because the tips are actually welded shut. This is what I'm talking about. I pinched a hole and I tack welded it shut. And the reason for that is to kind of build up a little bit more oil pressure. I'm not really worried about oil pressure, only because I'm running the Type S oil pump. Now, again, preference, if you're running cast pistons, you want to cool it down with oil squirters. If you're running forged pistons, you can block it off. You can get the Golden Eagle kit. But because, you know what I'm saying, I'm keeping this very budgeted, I am using the stock squirters, just welded shut. So I'm going to go ahead and get these installed. They are torqued down to 8 pounds, but we're going to put 10 only because I'm using such a long extension. So, you know, hopefully that's going to be plenty enough to keep these secured. We went and cleaned pretty much all of the ports and stuff for the bearings, the journal, and all of the main bolts holes, because they were pretty gunked up from, I guess, this engine not being, you know, changed with the oil frequently, that it kind of just gunked up everything. So we cleaned everything out. We brake cleaned, we aired it, we did it multiple times to make sure that the brake clean drips out nothing other than fluid. So we are pretty much ready for the main bearings, and in this case we are going to be running with the ACO race bearings. These are standard spec and not the extra clearance. I got these because these were the only ones in stock and they will work perfectly fine for what we're doing here. So part number here is 5M1959H-STD, and this right here is the main. So we're going to go ahead and just open these up and get these all nice and cleaned up and installed into the block. All right guys, so every time you use brand new bearings, it's important to clean them out of the package, and we're going to be using brake cleaner in this case. Now, it's very important to note that these bearings have a top and bottom side. So if you look at the tangs, one is in the middle and the other one's offset. Now, in the orientation of the engine right here in the stand, the one with the tang offset is the bottom bearing, and the one with the middle is on the top, which is on the girdle side. I'm using brake cleaner on a blue shop tower just to clean these bearings. I am cleaning all of the, you know, whatever's caked on here from the package, while also polishing these out. And each one that I'm gonna finish cleaning, I'm just gonna go ahead and install it right into the block since it is ready for the bearings itself. Make sure it's nice and flat on here. Make sure the tangs are on the correct side. Now guys, because this motor didn't spin a bearing and it looks really good on the crank journals itself, we're just going to clean it up and reuse it the way it is. We're using brake cleaner and just pretty much, again, a shop towel, and really just going along the journals, clean all of the I guess residuals off of it, and also using the brake cleaner to get all of the inside passages to ensure that these aren't blocked themselves. So we're just going to go ahead and clean this and get this installed onto the block. Fold it like this, like hella tight, and you know, you just kind of do the shimmy shimmy. Yeah, that's like a polish. Yeah. See, look at that. That's good. Like salad dressing. Like salad dressing. So before we throw in the thrust washers and the actual assembly lube, we're going to throw the crank in to check the straightness of the crank. Simple enough. Let's get the crank in here. So when checking for crank straightness, you could go through all 5 journals, but the middle one is going to take the most flexing if there was a flex in the crank. So this dial setup right here is a mid-grade. This is like a Matco. This is about maybe $200. And then you got a much higher end one, which this alone probably more than $400. But to keep it very budget friendly, you can use a Harbor Freight version, right? Because really all we're checking for is the dial to move. Because if the dial moves, something is wrong with that's causing the dial to move. So simple enough, dial is on, and the next step here is just to rotate the crank to see if that dial moves to let us know if the crank is straight or not. Let's see what this crank looks like. And by the looks of it, it barely moves. The verdict, it's a good crank. If your engine is not messed up, by all means, if you're just rebuilding it just to rebuild it, you don't really need to do this step. This is like really precisioned, meticulous engine builds to ensure that there's no mistake in this rebuild. But it's nice for Nomis to come out here with this tool to ensure my crank is straight, and it looks like we're good. All right, guys, so after checking the straightness of the crank, the next step here is to check the clearance for the mains of the crank. Now, this requires me to put the girdle on, and what we're doing right now is we're cutting up the plastic gauge. For Hondas, you're using inches, which is the green plastic gauge right here. I got this from O'Reilly's for like, I don't know, 10 bucks. And we're going to put plastic gauge on each of the main bearings. Keep in mind the service manual has a different specification for the center one, which is main journal number 3. So we're going to go ahead and just get all that set in there, and then we'll place the bearings into the girdle and then get that installed on here and torqued down. So each journal has their plastic gauge on it. We are going to be measuring all 5. It's very important to not move the crank when putting this girdle on, so be very careful. I'm going to stop talking so I can focus. According to this all data screenshot 2004 TSX, torquing the main bolts down to the girdle is 22 foot-pounds and then additional 56 degree turn. So because I don't have an angle finder or a protractor, I do have my phone kind of gorilla taped to my torque wrench. But first, I am going to go ahead and torque them down to 22 foot-pounds. And then we got to do the 56 degrees, and I'm going to be using my phone for this one. So on an iPhone, you can use a compass, which tells you a bunch of degrees here. And if you want to be precise with 56 degrees, be sure to start at 0. 56 degrees. Okay. Next one over. Set it back to 0. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark down main, and then I'm gonna go, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we just took off the girdle, took some measurements real quick, and let me show you guys what these are reading. So I'm gonna take this one near the crank at cylinder 1, right? So go ahead and just measure that for the peep to see. And we are dead on at 15. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark that down as cylinder number 10015. Now I'm also gonna write down what the specification is. Factory specs for 1, 2, 4, and 5 is going to be between 0.0007 to 0.0016. Now for number 3 is different, and that's gonna be reading factory specs at 0010 to 0019. So right now number 1 is looking really good, and then on to number 2. Number 2, we agreed it's a smidge over. We're gonna call that about a 16, just a smidge over. The GoPro doesn't really focus too well, but you can kind of see it there. Number 2, 0016. So right on top of number 3, we're at 15. Very faint, but trust me. This one looks to be about, I would say, a little over 15, but I probably would call that 15 still. I would just call it 15, yeah. Okay. So 4 is going to be 0015 as well. This one's dead 15. Okay, so these are all of the crank main clearances, and we are definitely inspect in all of them. So now we're pretty much going to slip the thrust washers in here and then add assembly lube after cleaning out the journals to permanently install the girdle back onto the engine. So we're using ACLs for the thrust washer, and I usually install it before the crank. I've never done it this way where you can just slide it into its cavity, but thrust washers go into crank number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 main, and simple enough, lubricate the thrust washer and slippity-doo. Ah, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Also make sure the grooves are facing outwards.
Grooves are facing outward, the flat side faces the block. Wow, okay, simple enough. Done?
Yep.
Wow. Okay, well, that's a new way for me. We're also going to be installing the girdle right now as well, so be sure to lubricate your mains before putting the girdle on and torquing them down. Now, before putting on the main girdle, because this is the final assembly, we have to put RTV on the block before the girdle, because K-Series don't use gaskets, they use gasket makers. So we're going to be doing this twice, one before the girdle and one before the oil pan. Where's my shit? So from this edge around this bolt, they say you don't necessarily need to do all the way here because there's nothing that goes here. And then it goes all the way to this edge, yeah? Because what goes here? Oh, the cover.
The cover.
I'm using Permatex Ultra Gray also from O'Reilly's, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use my finger and smear RTV across the entire surface. My finger is not pressed to the surface, so I keep it like maybe a millimeter all the way across. Right?
Yeah.
Good old mallet, Pop's mallet.
22.
Right?
Oh my god, baby, I love it. This is so good. What assembly lube? Because assembly lube makes it like stiffer. So
Smooth as butter.
Yeah.
Check out how smoothly this crank spins, effortlessly.
And that's what assembly lube.
That's what assembly lube. What's the saying? What's the saying? Beautiful, dog.
Oh.
Beautiful, dog. So we have the main girdle bolts all torqued down. We did the 22 foot-pound first time. Second time we did the 56 degrees on each and every one of these. Now we're gonna do the 12mm outside bolts, and then we'll move into the piston and rods, because that is the next thing on the list. All right, guys, so we are getting ready to get the piston into the block. Now, before we install the piston rings on the piston itself, I do want to show you guys how I went about measuring my piston rings. Now, I already did all of this, so it is pretty much ready to just go on and in, but I do want to show you guys this for the rebuild purpose, and it's very simple. So I'm gonna set you guys up. I am using OEM RBB piston rings for the TSX pistons, and mine are already spec'd out yesterday, so these could technically just go on and then the piston can go into the cylinder. But I want to show you guys how to get the rings down, how to check your measurements, and then after getting your measurements, it's really up to you to run them as is if they're in specification, or if you want to gap them accordingly for a different, like, you know, setup, if you're going boost or nitrous or whatever the case may be. So I'm gonna go ahead and just grab the top ring and second ring. The oil control rings, you don't really need to like check the specification on these. They kind of just go as is out of the box. Now the first ring, which is called the top ring, is smooth on both ends and is normally marked with a 1N. Right here in the corner it says 1N. N is typically, I mean, for me, I reference it as north, so north has to point up. The lettering 1N has to face up. I'm gonna go ahead and measure the rings on the top of the cylinder about an inch down, using the piston itself to bring it down evenly. Right? Now I already spec'd this out. You want to measure the gap between both ends of the ring itself. You'll see it when you do this yourself. My ring gap read 15, so I'm going to show you guys on the feeler gauge. 15 is snug there. You can see it doesn't move, and I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. And then I'm going to measure all the way down at the bottom because that's what the service manual says to do. I'm going to go ahead and bring this ring about 1 inch before the end of the bore. Bring it down just a smidge more. I'm going to go ahead and measure that again. And this time it's a really snug 15, so I probably want to call that a 14. I'm going to go ahead and switch my feeler here to a 14. And a 14 is nice and snugged in there. My reading at 014 at the bottom is really good. The standard new specification is 008 to 014, but the service limits is 024. So it's got a long ways to go. My specs is going to work great for the top ring. Now we're going to go ahead and check the second ring. The second ring has a 2N marking on it, and the second ring actually is tapered on the edge, which is typically called a scraper ring because this is what kind of scrapes the oil off the cylinder walls. So we're going to go ahead and measure the second ring just as we did the first. Mine measured out to about 030, and you can see it's really snug there, doesn't really move. And I'm going to go ahead and slide it down the cylinder once again. This one is actually a little tighter, so I'm going to go ahead and safely assume this is like a 029, only because my feeler gauge doesn't have a 029 on it. The 30 goes in, but it doesn't go in all the way. So the specification for the second ring gap, standard new, is 020 to 0.026, and the service limits is 030. So we're like on the borderline, but it will work perfectly fine. Okay guys, so we are going to be installing the piston rings onto the TSX pistons. Again, I am using the OEM piston rings from Honda, and all of these are measured per cylinder yesterday, and all of my rods are in the order I took them out. So this is 1, 2, 3, and 4, and simple enough, the rings go on 2 ways. You can use a ring plier, which I don't have anymore. I had one, but I don't have it anymore. Or you can carefully put it on by hand. I did clean these pistons, so I got a lot of the gunk out of the grooves for the piston rings, and this is pretty much ready for the new rings to go on. And I am going to start with the oil control ring, which is actually 3 pieces, and it goes on the bottom skirt right here. The oil control ring consists of these 3 right here, guys, and there is this 2 very thin ring, and then you got this brass squiggly looking one. Now take note that this end does not lay over each other when it's in the groove of the piston. It is meant to butt up and kiss up. But also take note that on the service manual it says that these grooves, right, you can see how it's sharp pointing up, and then the other end is rounded. It's supposed to be, how do you say this? The U is facing up. You see where it curves up into a U? You guys probably can't see it on the GoPro. Hopefully I can zoom it in right here. The end of this ring is facing up, which makes it into a U shape. These have to face upward on the piston. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with the brass ring. I'm gonna go ahead and slip it over from the top. Now you only need to spread this enough to slip it over the head of the piston. You don't want to over extract it because these are fragile and they can break very easily. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that right in there. I'm gonna install one of these slimmer rings from the top right into that 3rd groove on top of the brass ring. Like so. And then the last ring, I am going to put it from the bottom just so we don't have to slip it over all of the current rings on the piston already. Simple enough. Oil control ring installed. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the second ring. Again, I mentioned earlier that the second ring is a scraper ring. It does have a taper on it. It does have the marking 2N on it as well, and N is normally north, which means the lettering has to face up. So I'm going to go ahead and just open this up a little bit and slip it over into the groove of the second ring. The last ring we have here is the top ring, the first ring Also marked 1N on the top. The lettering has to face up, and again, pry it softly just to get it over the head of the piston into its groove. There you go. All piston ring is now installed on the piston. We'll go ahead and just do the rest of them, which Nomis already did. And then we'll get into the clocking. All the rings are installed. We're going to be putting the inner and outer piston, the corresponding pistons, in the block first before we do the two center. We are going to be plastic gauging this as well too. So our bearing of choice, also ACL race. These are standard spec as well. 4B1972H-STD. So again, we're going to be taking off these old bearings. We're going to give it a good old cleaning. All the tangs and everything, give that a good old cleaning. And then we will give the ACL race a good cleaning and install these so we can get these ready to go into the cylinders. All of the rod bearings have the tang on the same side, so you're not specific to a top or a bottom bearing. So I'm going to go ahead and just get these all installed into the rods now. Beautiful, dog. I'm gonna throw this ring orientation on the screen so you guys can see visually what I'm talking about, even though I have the piston here in my hand. So we're gonna do the ring orientation starting with the bottom oil control ring, and based off the diagram, you gotta make sure the arrow is facing cylinder number 1. So I'm gonna go ahead and rotate that for me. And then the oil control ring, I'm gonna start at the bottom with the really thin bottom oil ring, because the oil control ring consists of 3, right? So the bottom ring, the bottom slim ring, I'm gonna face it towards this valve relief based off the diagram, the service manual, if I can find it. So I have it right here. This bottom gap on the bottom lower control ring is faced this valve relief. The bronze one, you definitely do not want it in line, although it doesn't really matter too much, but I am going to clock it away from the opening of the other rings. Now that I have the middle brass control ring away from the opening of the bottom ring, I'm gonna go ahead and clock the third ring on the oil control across from the first lower. So this one is on this valve relief, and the third ring is gonna be on the opposite end on this valve relief. So I'm gonna go ahead and move that over now. Right? The diagram shows second ring is gonna sit on this valve relief. So I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this opening all the way around to this valve. So top ring is gonna be across from second ring. So that's gonna be over near the arrow on this valve relief. You can see the opening right there. I'm gonna go ahead and clock it all the way there. And now you pretty much keep the same ring orientation on all of your piston. So now that we have our ring orientation set, we're gonna go ahead and get these down to the cylinder. So this is the ring compressor we're using. What type is this one?
You just ratchet it down. You get this stuff at O'Reilly's. It's typical stuff.
Yeah, that's new to me because I've always used the ARP or the Wiseco ones, but I don't have anything for TSX piston spec. So that's gonna work great for a ton of sizes, and that's what we're gonna be using today. So again, check your orientations before putting it into the ring compressor, because once it goes into the cylinder, the way you set it beforehand is how it's going to be. So bottom ring gap, this valve relief, the splits in between. Third one is on this valve relief. Second one is in this valve over here, and then cylinder 1 is on this end. So I think we are golden to compress this one down. Give it a little juice.
Ooh-wee. Can I get a Hoya?
Man, it sounds like I'm going fishing with that. Now, does this apply to K series, like B series tang on the exhaust side?
Yes.
Arrow to the cylinder 1 side, right?
Yeah. And also, an easy way to make sure you have it in the right way is the bigger valve pockets are usually towards the intake side, because the intake valves are bigger than the exhaust side.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just trying to get the
lip up, so
to
it
come
can
out
butt
of
up
it.
here.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Got a little lip coming out of the ring compressor just so it can sit itself into the cylinder before pushing it down. So far, it's looking good. What is it, that thing that Mario says all the time?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Here we go. Damn. First piston down the hole. So I got the second ring orientation all set up. Now, I also forgot to mention, don't forget to lubricate the cylinder walls before pressing these piston and new rings in. This one is ready to go in. So for rod caps, you got to make sure you have tang on the tang side. The tang is that little lip right there on the bearing, and the tang on this side, you can see it right there. So that too needs to match up. We have the plastic gauge right there, and we're going to go ahead and drop this straight down. Okay, straight down, going down, down, baby. And then this right here is cylinder number 1, tang to tang side, plastic gauge in place, straight down. Rod bolts, be sure to lubricate it before installing it. 27. Lucy! What the hell? Oh yeah, that's her food right there. She didn't show up earlier. 27. 27, and now we got to do an additional 120 degrees. Good lord.
There.
Sounds like that animal from the movie The Dinosaur from Disney. I used to watch that religiously when I was growing up.
All right.
All right, guys, so back up on the screen here, the specification for the rod clearances for the K24 motor is between 0013 to .0026. Now, service limits is 0.0030, and where are we reading here? I don't know if you guys can see that, but we're just a hair over 0015, 16 if anything, but that's definitely in clearance range. And rod number 4, that's like 15 right there.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I think we're Gucci taters. So I guess these rod bearings are cleared out and inspect. We're gonna clean all the plastic gauges off, and then we're gonna reinstall the rod caps one more time. Man, just to think that I got to do 120 degrees on what, 2, 4, 6, 8 more rod bolts. Man, I need to go back to the gym. Guys, we just finished installing all of the piston and rods. Everything is torqued to spec, 120 degrees, all the muscle, I can feel it. But damn, check out the rotating assembly, guys. It's really, really smooth. That's freaking awesome, man. Freaking awesome. So one more thing we're gonna do before we do the oil pump stuff is to check crankshaft end play. Now, this is just a quick extra step to ensure that our end play is in spec, right? So simple enough, he's got his dial set up here, and he already has his plate blocked up to the block. I mean, not blocked up, but bolted to the block. And we're going to show you guys simply how we're going to check crankshaft end play. You want to make sure the dial does not interfere with anything else that may be moving on the crankshaft. And once you get that all nice and cleared up,
I'm gonna push it one way and then set it 0 and then push it the other way.
okay, like there, dead 0. Want to shift it one way.
So let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8 thousandths.
8.
So now we're reference it to the OEM spec.
Again, quickly, we push the crank out we set the gauge to 0, and then we pushed the crank all the way back in, and it was like what, 8 thou. And right now he's going to cross-reference with the OE spec of the K24A2 TSX and see where it lands. So based off the service manual, the limitation for the crankshaft end play is 0.004 to 0.014, and the service limits is, what is it?
18.
It's 0.018. So it looks like we're almost in the middle of the like specification, which is really good, right? So now that we verify our crankshaft end play, now we're gonna move on to installing our K20 conversion oil pump. This is my base model RSX oil pump, which is the same as a Type S if it's coming out of an RSX, not the EP3. And when you get one of these, you're gonna find out really quickly that this does not fit the 24 direct bolt-on. So I already modified this one. I did this in a couple of videos ago. So if you look at the bottom here, it's all cut out, and the reason for that is because of clearance reasons. And if you look, you got this big old thing right here that goes in the way of that. So I already clearanced mine, and this oil pump now fits without interference, right? You'll figure this out when you get to installing your pump or having to modify your pump. It's really simple. You go on Google, you go on YouTube, type in K20 pump on 24, plenty of videos to follow through with. And because I got this oil pump from the junkyard, okay, forgive me, but I didn't have any of the other components needed to put this on a 24. So I ordered everything brand new from Honda, and it's a very simple, small list to buy. Now, you have to get the K20 oil pump chain, which is this right here, part number 13441-PCX-004, right? And in part of that, you have to get the K20 oil chain tensioner, which is this piece right here, 13460-PNC-004, right? You're going to use the same hardware that came off the TSX, and I have that in the bag over there. As far as I've seen on YouTube, you pretty much just get a screw or a wood screw or something small enough to go into that hole so you can thread it in and pop it out. So here's this little plug that was in the hole. I had to like drill it down a little bit more to catch some threads on it, but it's just really pressed in there, and you pretty much just give it a little force, pops right on out. So now that this is out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and set up the new bolt and washer to go into that hole to plug it up. Why did I buy for the wrong hole, dude? All right, guys, I must have looked at the diagram wrong, but this one is for the wrong hole. I don't know why I bought it for this hole, but this is the wrong bolt. Anywho, simple enough. If you have a really short 12mm, that's a regular 12mm hole. So I'm gonna go ahead and just head over here to my little spare box, find the shortest 12mm that I have, and just stick it in a hole, I guess. I got a 12mm bolt here, about 3/4 inch. I'm not entirely sure, but got some RTV on it. Threads right in there perfectly. And I'm gonna go ahead and give it about 100 UGAs. Not really. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just give it a snug tug. And we are golden. That thing is plugged up. All right, so this gets bolt on with 6 10mm bolts. And I gotta figure out where they are at. Got the 10mm fresh out of the chem dip right there on the floor. 6 of them total. My torque specification is 1 pull on the trigger, because honestly the torque spec is really not that much, but I'm gonna check it anyways. So now that we have the witness tray on, we are ready to install the 20 oil pump. Now, the oil pump has to go on with the chain, because once the pump is in place, there is literally no way to put the chain on. So what we have to do here is grab the new chain, get it out of the bag, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and put the chain on the crank gear first, right? Actually, hold on, I gotta talk specifics here. You gotta make sure your oil pump gear has its dowel pin inside the crank so it can sit flush, which you guys just saw right there. I'm gonna go ahead and put the chain on the sprocket on the crankshaft, and then I'm gonna put the pump onto the chain. And it's very important to ensure that all of the teeth are in the chain before you tension and set the dowel and pump on the block. And oil pump goes on, chain is loose because we don't have the tensioner on. The 2 bolts that holds the oil pump to the block is 2 different sizes, so be wary of that. And go ahead and just drive this down with a gun. I don't know what the torque specs are, so just look it up online. But I'm gonna put it up on the screen anyways when I find it. The write-up didn't really specify using a chain tensioner from the TSX or the RSX, but it did specifically say that you can use this guide from the 20. So I am going to keep the 24, I guess the other tensioner. I don't know what the terminology is for this one, but I'm gonna grab the hardware real quick. Totally slipped my mind to buy this thing brand new, but you know what? We're gonna send it. Guys, if it has a torque spec, please torque it down. Don't be like me. So guys, we just completed our K20 oil pump conversion. We got the K20 windage tray, the K20 oil pump, the K20 oil pump chain, and the K20 guide right there. Now, this is pretty much our bottom end rotating assembly rebuild. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean up my workspace real quick. I'm gonna rotate the engine around and kind of talk about the rest of the assembly. All right, Nomis, give them a little taste of the rotating assembly. Damn, so smooth. Beautiful, dog.
Pretty effortless.
Yeah, man. That's when you know this motor is gonna perform cherry. And guys, I think I'm gonna wrap up the video right here. Like I mentioned in the very beginning of this video, my goal was just to get the rotating assembly assembled, and if I could, I would do the cylinder head, but none of the parts showed up, so I don't want it to leave you guys off like incomplete as far as the head installation go. So I think I'm gonna keep the head installation in its own video once I have all the parts ready to attach to the short block. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. A lot of stuff still on the table to be installed, like head gasket, tensioner, chain, guides, and all this good brand new jazz. Hopefully this motor is gonna do me great. I'm sure it's gonna do me great. I think it is gonna do me great. But yeah, pretty much K24A2 bottom end rebuild, bottom end assembly, pretty much completed. Hopefully I covered everything as best as I could. Hopefully all of the you know, specification on the screen will help you guys understand it more thoroughly, aside from me explaining it. Big shout out to my buddy Nomis for coming out here and really just giving me a hand and actually helping me with a few extra steps like crankshaft end play and crankshaft straightness and all of that. You know, simple tests to verify everything is going to be great. So as far as everything we did, everything checked out. This motor, I'm certain, is gonna perform well, and I'm hoping to get this into that car soon, but you know, I don't want to talk about it until I actually go and get it done, right? So again, guys, I am going to end the video right here. I am going to make a part 2 with the cylinder head installation. I'm going to do everything related to the head as far as getting it onto the short block, getting all the cam cap, rocker assembly, all of this right here reinstalled on the rods, all the valve lash, everything pertaining to the cylinder head and timing. We will cover it in the next video, so I hope you guys stick around for that and hit the subscribe button. But most importantly, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button. And if you guys saw something I may have missed or something I could have done differently, leave a comment down below and let me know, because I feel like this is not going to be the only K-Series engine I'm going to put together. Now that I got the basic knowledge down, I got plenty of other engines that need some loving. So again, if you guys love this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up. If you find it helpful, be sure to leave it a thumbs up. And if you guys want to stick around for part 2 of the K20A2 rebuild head assembly onto the block, be sure to hit the subscribe button. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.